Hello and welcome to the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at the University of Central Florida. Our guest today is Asra Nomani, author of Standing Alone in Mecca and a veteran journalist.
Hi.
Welcome to our program.
Thanks so much.
Tell us a little bit about how you got into the field of journalism, and then we'll talk about some of your more recent projects.
Well, I have one person to blame. That's Nancy Drew. She got that embedded curiosity inside my system, and I just love the chase. I love the idea of satiating your curiosity. I love the idea that you could go anywhere you wanted to go. You could knock on doors that other people considered forbidden. And so as a young girl, I started chronicling everything that I possibly could.
Now, you were actually born in India.
I was.
And at what age did you come to the United States?
I was born in Bombay, which is now called Mumbai, and I came to the U.S. at the age of 4. I literally got on a jet plane with my brother, who was just 6 at the time. My grandmother and grandfather put us on this plane. We had garlands of flowers, to celebrate this journey we were about to take. And it was just us, because my parents had already come to America. My father was part of this generation of President Obama's father, where there were these teaching initiatives that were bringing students from quote-unquote third world countries over to America. So my dad had come over, my mom had come over, and now we came over. And we arrived in matching clothes. The fabric that my grandmother had stitched for us had the same stripes in it, just in case we got separated along the way.
See. And so you adjusted quickly to American society?
I did. I don't think I did, because it's a blackout.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't remember anything. I have a son now who's 6 years old, and I think he has better memory than I have ever had about that period of my life. I think it was just so shocking. My brother literally threw up when he came off the plane, because I think we forget just what the immigrant experience means. I mean, you're really a pioneer. It's something that we sort of take for granted now because it's so easy to travel, but what you're doing is really an out-of-body experience. I mean, you're going from a world into a new one, and as children, we had none of the training that you have nowadays sometimes. I didn't know English. My grandmother had lied on my passport so that I could go to kindergarten early. She was the, spirited, ambitious immigrant grandmother, and it was really hard, actually.
Well, you overcame all of that,
Yeah.
clearly, and how did you actually, Nancy Drew inspired you, but how did you actually get into journalism? Did you plan a career in journalism, studying it and so forth, or did you sort of happen into it as some people do?
Well, I was the daughter of a professor from India, and so like a lot of immigrant kids from that culture, I was expected to be either a doctor or an engineer, and that was the path I was going to take. I was interested in science, went to National Science Foundation camp in high school, but senior year, I was editor of the Red and Blue Journal at Morgantown High School, scooping the local paper on the, politics of the school board, and went into college at West Virginia University as a chemistry major. And my second year, my professor, bless him for his clarity, said, "Asra, you have to choose between journalism or chemistry," because I was basically doing my degree at the college paper, working there full time, and I chose journalism. And he was really great, as professors can be, in sort of directing you into where you naturally might need to be going.
And then eventually your interest in journalism took you to some of the hottest spots on the planet.
Yeah, it was the 1980s that I got into journalism, and I wanted to go to Beirut. I wanted to cover war. Well, I ended up getting my first job at the Wall Street Journal, and the most intense wars that I covered were fare wars between the airlines, and so it was not exactly what I expected, but after September 11th, something clicked, and got the same kind of wake-up call that a lot of people got after this horrific, tragic headline event. And I got on a plane some 30 years after I'd first made that journey from South Asia and went to Pakistan to try to do some reporting that could help bridge this gap between the West and the Muslim world.
And how long did you stay during that initial visit?
Well, I stayed I got on a plane in late September of '01, and I ended up going into the pits of darkness there and leaving in the spring by about March of '02.
That was an incredible period when everything was in flux worldwide.
It was, and I feel like I was right in the trenches of a war of ideas, a war of ideology. In Pakistan, there was a huge movement sympathizing with the Taliban, and so I was going through the study circles of aunties in the Pakistani community who were sympathizers. I wrote about how they were selling their old saris from India in these kind of bake sales for the Taliban. I called them the Taliban Ladies Auxiliary. They were sympathetic ideologically because Pakistan had now seen at that point about 30 years of the influence of the puritanical ideology from Saudi Arabia called Wahhabism. And so mixed with their own homegrown conservatism, this scene had erupted that was really the breeding ground for the kind of militancy that we see today.
So you came back from that determined to explore the issue further. You weren't just going to do your multi-month stay and then on to something else. You kept coming back to the region in different places.
Well, what happened is that on January 23rd, 2002, my dear friend and colleague from the Wall Street Journal went off for an interview. He and his wife, Marianne Pearl, were staying at my house in Karachi that I had rented to start writing a book that I was been out traveling around doing. And his name was Danny Pearl. And so that day, Danny was kidnapped. And over the next days, we learned that he had been kidnapped in the name of Islam by young Pakistani Muslims who dropped off the photos of Danny at a mosque. And we learned then that he was killed in part because he's Jewish. And I really saw the worst expression of the faith into which I was born. And from that, I came back knowing that something had shifted deeply inside of me, but not really knowing where it was going to take me. And so that began this journey into which I ended up becoming an accidental activist and writer.
And so how did the book actually come together? Was that years in the making?
Books are always years in the making, I think. You think initially that it's going to be this 1 year, 2 year, go in, do the reporting, do the research, write it up. My first book ended up taking from 2000 till 2000 and, when was it? 2003. So that was a 3-year project. That was a book where I explored issues of identity as a Muslim.
Yes.
Yeah, as a Muslim, as an American. And it's called Tantrika, Traveling the Road of Divine Love. I thought I was going to end with, a magical story of romance and passion. In fact, what it ended up being was really romantic story of a different sort, where you actually learn to know yourself, where you learn to love who you are as you are. It's the quintessential universal journey through the history of time, right? In fiction and nonfiction, it never ends. And in my case, it really came to fruition in Pakistan in that darkness, because ironically, in the darkness of Danny's kidnapping, I was able to see the truth of who I am, and know that I could be this fierce woman raised in America, but still rooted in my ethnicity and religion, but I didn't have to make compromises. And so often I think that, especially when you're working with all these dual worlds, you think that you have to be something that you're not. And I had always done that through my life. I would change my clothes on trips back to India in mid-flight so that I wouldn't be wearing my Western clothes when I landed in India, to the disapproval of my relatives. And so that's that kind of duplicity that we sometimes live with. And my first book was really about finding myself. And the second book, I ended up going on pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca, on the Hajj, this holiest pilgrimage for Muslims. And there I really came to terms with who I could be as a Muslim woman.
And from that, you've continued to explore issues related to religion and culture and society and political violence. And Daniel Pearl is still very much a part of your current work. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I ended up, becoming this accidental activist in my mosque back in Morgantown, West Virginia, because oftentimes in order to change the world, you have to start right in your own backyard. And I saw this encroaching conservatism and intolerance in my local Muslim community, and I thought I had to challenge it. So that was my first step. And then what I realized in the midst of that, as I came to peace with the fact that there was an interpretation of Islam that was peaceful, loving, and compassionate, and was the antithesis of what the terrorists are trying to say Islam is about. In the midst of that, I realized that I really had to also come to peace with what happened to Danny. I had to know, as a journalist, as a friend, what happened to him. And so I went to Washington, D.C. to teach journalism at Georgetown University, and have been heading a project that we call the Pearl Project. It's an investigation into who really killed Danny. It's modeled after the Innocence Projects, where students look at murder convictions. And we've done amazing work. I'm so proud of these students, and we're hoping our findings will come out early next year.
So there is an end product that will come out of this.
There is, and we have this little vision. Danny loved comic books, and graphic novels are so hot right now that we're actually thinking of trying to put out our findings in graphic novel format too. Because journalism has to be creative and rich and alive, and so we're up for any of these new models that are out there.
Tell us a little bit about Daniel Pearl. I know people came to know him through his captivity and the tragedy that followed, and probably didn't know a whole lot more, and others saw the movie that was based on that experience. But is there something about him that you could share that maybe would be interesting, enlightening to our audience?
Yeah, and I think that to know Danny, you just have to think about like the buddy in your life who's just there to make you have a quick laugh, who is in balance and is not, just taking from you, but is actually giving you this visa into a great friendship. I was this girl who had come from India. I wasn't allowed to go to my high school prom because I was to be a good Muslim girl and not date and not dance. And so Danny learned this when we first met when I was in my late 20s. And he said, "We're gonna throw a prom for you." And so in the summer of 1993, we threw a Midsummer Night's Prom, and all the women wore their cheesy old bridesmaids dresses, the guys wore tuxedos, and I had my prom at the age of 28. And so that's the kind of friend he was.
Now, what else you said you teach in a journalism program at Georgetown, and you work on the Pearl Project. Is there anything else you do with or through the university, or does that give you sort of a perch and then you can continue? I know a journalist cannot stop writing.
Right.
So I'm guessing you are engaged in other writing projects.
I'm continuing to write. I spent most of my career, 15 years, in the newsroom doing he said, she said reporting. And so that skilled me in the art of reporting and writing. And now in this incarnation, what I'm doing is trying to take those skills and advocate for an interpretation of Islam that is peaceful, tolerant, woman-friendly and compassionate. It's really simple. It's this reformation that all of the faiths have had at some point or another. And so as a writer, I'm basically doing the 21st century equivalent of pamphleteering, you know, through op-eds, through blogs, through talking. This year, I talked about and have been writing about an issue that's really important to me, which is love and marriage. Traditional Islam has really strict rules on who a Muslim woman can marry. And the biggest rule is that she can't marry a man outside of the faith. And so now in the 21st century, what I'm basically arguing is if we want to claim that we're a truly tolerant faith, if we want to claim that we're pluralistic, then we'll have to allow our Muslim youth and even those who aren't so young to marry whom they love. And we shouldn't have prejudice in our heart. And so this is an issue that faiths, races have had through the history of time. And so this is our social litmus test, I think. And this is just, you know, the cause that matters to me right now. It's one that, you know, hits young Muslims all around the world.
I'm thinking when you were talking about sort of your progressive view of how the religion ought to be in your mind and how that fits in with the current phase of Islamic revivalism that we've been seeing around the world for the past 3 decades or so. And there is definitely a progressive piece within that movement, but are there any good numbers as to what percentage that represents? Is it 10%, 20%?
The reformist progressive movement?
Within the Islamic revival.
You know, I think it's pretty small. I'll be honest. I think that the community is dominated by very traditionalist thinking.
Including here in
including
the
in
United
America. Just as an example, 2 out of 3 mosques in America had forced a woman to sit behind a partition in the late 1980s and early 90s. And now that number is 1 out of 2. So there's a growing conservatism. That segregation is an indicator of ideology. In the same way, ideological interpretations regarding you know, issues about interfaith relations, women's roles, these things are still very traditional and conservative. I think that maybe you know, 10% are truly progressive. I think that most Muslims, the majority of Muslims, 60 to 70%, do not want a violent interpretation of the faith, you know, and then sadly this revivalist movement that you talk about has also included a revival that is about puritanical Islam, you know, ironically, where they want to go back to a literal read of the Quran. And so that's what we're up against. And I'm just borrowing really from their pages. Sayyid Qutb is this, you know, scholar and writer who really is the inspiration for the Muslim Brotherhood with his book Milestones. So right now I'm writing a little pamphlet, a little long essay called Milestones for a Spiritual Jihad, because in his original Milestones he called for a violent jihad. And what I want to say is that we need a spiritual revival. We need to really come back to the soul of the faith, like all people of religions need to do, and reject this idea of violence as the answer.
And I'm thinking as I'm listening to you that the positions you advance come with a certain degree of risk. Not so much here perhaps, but when you travel, have you found that? You've had issues, personal security issues, especially in some of the regions where you've done research.
Yeah, you know, I ironically got my first death threat from a student at Penn State University. I traced it back through the internet, you know, in all the ways that anonymity is not really allowed. And he is part of that young generation that has absorbed this ideology that says that we have to have a really literal, strict interpretation of the religion. So when I said, you know, women should not be stuck in the back rows and the back corners of mosques, he took it as great offense and wrote on a comment board, "Death to Asra." And I was kind of stunned that somebody would be so motivated, you know, to want to kill another person in the name of religion. But I know that this has forever been the case through history. And I do have to be careful and you know, make sure that I don't make myself vulnerable to situations. But thank goodness I am in America, because I know that if my cell phone is charged and I've got a signal, I can always call 911 and feel like I can get protection.
Mm-hmm. But when you travel, you can't do that.
Right.
And I was thinking about that lengthy period you spent in Pakistan. Did you ever have any issues during that time that caused you to pause and wonder about what you were doing?
Well, you know, in Pakistan, the complexity of our world, of our Muslim world, is so rich that I was then called not only, you know, a troublemaker, but also a spy for India, because there's such lovely relations between the two countries. I say that sarcastically because it's so sad that, you know, these two countries that shared one nation before the partition too are at such, you know, such a conflict where there's so much suspicion between the countries. And so the lovely headlines that have come out of Pakistan have been things like, who is Asra Nomani and where is Asra Nomani and who is this baffling Indian lady, which my friends get a good chuckle about, and I always think that Danny would have a good laugh about. But it is the stuff of propaganda campaigns and smear campaigns and intimidation. And I just know that, you know, this has happened always, and it's something that I got to be careful about, but not to take personally.
So do you think this will be your main focus for quite some years to come, or is there something else in the background that you're sort of toying with as an idea or a focal area for the future?
I have this little boy, and I want to raise him to be a good man and a great man, and so I think of that as my, you know, top priority. And I think probably in this lifetime, this issue of changing the course of our Muslim world is probably my mandate. If it's a long, long process, I know that it'll take our generation, but yet the events of 9/11 prove that Islam has the way Islam is expressed is going to define our history right now, and I think that's where I can best contribute.
Good.
Yeah, I want to take the Islam out of Islam. This is my mandate in this lifetime.
Good. Well, thank you, Asra Nomani, for joining us today.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And thank you for the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.